The day Richard flung the crumpled divorce papers at my feet remains etched in my memory like a scar. I recall standing there frozen as he uttered those chilling words. "I've sold the house because I'm moving in with her. It's over, Anna." I was 34 then, a devoted homemaker to our barely 13-year-old son, Jason. Our life as I knew it shattered in that single moment. I was blindsided, naive, and utterly unprepared for what was to come. Richard and I crossed paths when I was merely 19, while he was 26, a charming man working at a pharmaceutical company's main office. I, a fresh high school graduate, worked as a receptionist at one of its subsidiaries. His attention flattered me. Young, inexperienced, he seemed like a dream come true. Our whirlwind romance led to an unplanned pregnancy, and before I knew it, we were married in a modest ceremony. Life then appeared simple, or so I thought. I devoted myself to our home and to Jason. Richard was often busy, his presence in the house dwindling over the years. I didn't question it. I was too caught up in the day-to-day of raising our son and managing our home. The day he departed, everything crumbled. I was forced to confront the reality lurking beneath the surface of our seemingly happy life. Richard's infidelity, his growing distance. The signs were all there, but I had chosen to ignore them. With nowhere else to turn, Jason and I moved back to my family home. My sister Laura and her husband were far from welcoming. Their cold stares and hushed conversations made it clear that we were burdens, intruders in their settled life. I felt lost, a high school graduate with no significant work experience, suddenly tasked with finding a job to support myself and my son. The job market was intimidating, each rejection a blow to my already fragile state. But I had Jason to think about, a young boy thrust into a world of adult problems. It was during this desperate time that I found employment at a call center. It was far from ideal, but it was a start, a glimmer of hope in the darkness that had enveloped my life. The job was challenging, with long hours, irate customers, and a constant buzz of activity. But it gave me a sense of purpose, something I had lost in the chaos of my personal life. As I navigated the complexities of the corporate world, I realized how sheltered I had been, particularly regarding legal matters like divorce and alimony, leaving me vulnerable to Richard's whims. This realization ignited a fire within me. I vowed never to let myself be so helpless again. I immersed myself in learning, understanding the world beyond the confines of home and family. As Jason grew, I saw the impact of our situation on him. He was quiet, more reserved than his peers, his eyes holding a depth too mature for his age. But he was resilient, adapting to our new life with a strength that I admired. Our journey had just begun, a path filled with struggles and revelations. But in those struggles, I found a strength I never knew I had, and in those revelations, a determination to fight back, to claim what was rightfully ours. Life at my sister Laura's house was a daily reminder of how far we have fallen. Her husband, Mark, barely concealed his disdain, often remarking, "Anna, you need to find your own place soon. We can't support you forever." The pressure was relentless. I scoured job listings daily, each rejection deepening my sense of despair. But it was Jason's quiet resilience that kept me going. Despite the turmoil, he focused on his studies, his determination unwavering. One day, I stumbled upon a job opening at a customer service center. It wasn't glamorous, but it was a chance. The interview was nerve-wracking. I sat there, feeling out of place in my outdated suit, my resume embarrassingly thin. "Why do you want this job?" the interviewer asked. I wanted to say I had no choice, but instead, I mustered a smile and said, "I'm looking for an opportunity to learn and grow." To my surprise, they offered me the job. It was a contract position, but it was a start. I remember the mixed emotions I felt. Relief telling Laura and Mark, but also a stinging sense of inadequacy as Mark said, "Finally, you can start contributing." The job was challenging, the fast-paced environment, the endless calls. It was overwhelming. But I persevered, driven by the need to provide for Jason and to prove to myself that I could stand on my own. As I settled into the routine, I couldn't help but reflect on my marriage with Richard. How had I been so blind? The late nights, the unexplained absences, the whispered phone calls, I had brushed them off, believing in the illusion of a happy family. But the truth was, Richard had been living a double life, and I was just a convenient facade. This realization was a bitter pill to swallow. It fueled a growing anger within me towards Richard for his betrayal and towards myself for my naivety. But it was a conversation with a coworker that truly opened my eyes. She was a single mother like me, but much more informed. As we talked about our experiences, she said something that struck a chord. "Anna, did you get any alimony or child support? You know you're entitled to it, right?" I was stunned. The thought had never crossed my mind. Richard had left us with nothing, and I had just accepted it. I realized then how much I didn't know, how unprepared I was for the real world. Determined to make things right, I began to educate myself. I read books, searched online, anything I could find on divorce and family law. The more I learned, the more I understood the extent of Richard's manipulation. And then one day, I received a call from Jason's school. He had been in a fight. My heart sank as I rushed to the school, fearing the worst. But what I found was not a troubled child, but a young man pushed to his limits. "He called you a gold digger," Jason said, his eyes fiery with anger. "He said you were after Dad's money." I was speechless when I heard him utter those words about you. The pain and humiliation of our situation had seeped into my son's world, poisoning it. It was a wake-up call. I couldn't let Richard's betrayal define us any longer. That night, as I watched Jason sleep, I made a vow. I would fight back. I would reclaim what Richard had taken from us, not just for my sake, but for Jason's too. It was time for Richard to face the consequences of his actions. The small apartment we eventually moved into was a far cry from the home we once shared with Richard. But it was ours. The walls were bare, the furniture minimal, but it represented a fresh start. Jason adapted quickly, his resilience continually surprising me. He threw himself into his studies with a fervor that was both impressive and concerning. "I want to do well, Mom, for us," he would say, his determination shining through his words. I had been working at the call center for a year now. The job was still demanding, but I had grown more confident, more adept at handling the challenges. The sense of achievement was small, but it was there, a constant reminder that I was more than Richard's discarded wife. One evening, as Jason and I were having dinner, he looked up from his plate and said, "Mom, do you ever think about Dad?" The question caught me off guard. Richard was a subject we rarely touched upon. "Sometimes," I admitted, "but not in the way you might think. I think about what he did to us, how he left us with nothing." Jason's eyes darkened. "I hate him for what he did. He thinks he can just walk away without any consequences." His words struck a chord in me. The anger, the sense of injustice that had been simmering within me found resonance in Jason's words. "You're right," I said, my voice steady. "He shouldn't get away with it." Over the next few weeks, I began to research more about divorce and family law. I learned about alimony, child support, and the legal avenues available for redress. The more I learned, the more empowered I felt. Then, a breakthrough came. I discovered that in cases of infidelity, the betrayed spouse could file for alimony, even years after the divorce, under certain conditions. This information was a revelation. Richard had cheated, and I had proof. The late-night calls, the secret behavior, it all added up. Emboldened by this discovery, I approached a lawyer. She was sympathetic, her eyes reflecting an understanding that went beyond professional courtesy. "You have a case," she said, "but it won't be easy. Are you ready for this?" I nodded, my resolve firm. "I'm ready. For myself and for Jason." The lawyer laid out a plan. We would file for alimony, citing Richard's infidelity and his failure to provide financial support after the divorce. The process would be long and possibly contentious, but I was prepared. I had to be strong. Jason was supportive, his quiet strength a constant source of comfort. "We'll get through this, Mom," he assured me. We're in this together. The day we filed the lawsuit, I felt a mix of emotions, fear, anxiety, but above all, a sense of righteousness. Richard had wronged us, and it was time for him to answer for his actions. As the legal proceedings began, I braced myself for the backlash. Richard was not going to take this lying down. But I was no longer the naive young woman he had left behind. I was stronger, wiser, and I was ready to fight. The legal battle against Richard was like opening a Pandora's box. The lawyer's investigation unearthed more than just infidelity. It revealed a web of lies and deceit that Richard had woven over the years. As we sat in the lawyer's office one afternoon, she presented us with a file. "This is more than I expected," she said, her tone serious. Richard wasn't just unfaithful. He was living a double life. The documents in the file painted a damning picture: bank statements, credit card bills, and photos. Evidence of Richard's secret life filled with luxury and indulgence. All while neglecting his family. "Look at this," the lawyer pointed to a photograph. It was Richard, looking carefree and happy with a woman who was not me, his arm wrapped around her. My heart clenched at the sight, but I steeled myself. This was the truth, the reality I had to face. Jason's face hardened as he looked at the evidence. "How could he do this to us? To you?" His voice was a mix of anger and disbelief. "We'll make him pay for this," I said, my voice firm. "He can't get away with it." The lawsuit took a toll on us. Richard's lawyers were aggressive, trying to discredit me, paint me as a vindictive wife. But I stood my ground, bolstered by the evidence and the support of Jason and our lawyer. Then came the day of the deposition. Richard sat across from us, his demeanor smug and confident. But that confidence waned as the lawyer began to present the evidence. "Mr. Richard, can you explain these expenses?" she asked, her tone accusatory, as she slid the bank statements across the table. Richard's eyes flicked over the documents, and I saw a flicker of panic. "These are personal expenses. They have nothing to do with my marriage," Richard protested. But the lawyer continued, her gaze unwavering. "These photos tell a different story." Richard's facade began to crack. He fumbled for words, his composure slipping. "It was nothing serious, just a fling," he tried to explain. "A fling?" Jason interjected, his voice steely. "I see. You destroyed our family for a fling." The room was thick with tension. Richard's lawyer tried to intervene, but the damage was done. The evidence was overwhelming, Richard's excuses feeble and unconvincing. As we left the deposition, I felt a sense of vindication. Richard had been exposed for what he truly was, a cheat. But it was not over yet. The lawsuit would continue, and I knew Richard would fight back. But I was ready. For the first time, I felt in control, no longer a victim of Richard's betrayal. I was fighting back, not just for myself, but for Jason, for the life we deserved. The lawsuit against Richard was dragging on, each hearing more contentious than the last. But amid this turmoil, a surprising development unfolded. One evening, Jason came home with a peculiar look on his face. "Mom, you won't believe what happened today," he said, a mix of amusement and disbelief in his voice. "What happened?" I asked, curious. "Today, I had a job interview at a pharmaceutical company. Guess who the HR manager is?" I felt a chill run down my spine. Not Richard. Jason nodded, confirming my suspicion. It was Richard. He didn't recognize me at first. I guess he forgot his own son's face. The irony was bitter. "Did you?" I started to ask, a part of me anxious about the encounter. Jason's eyes gleamed with a cold fire. I played along at first, but then, at the end, I couldn't resist. I asked him if the company condones affairs. The look on his face was priceless when he realized who I was. I was torn between shock and a sense of poetic justice. Richard, confronted by the son he had abandoned, in a setting where he had always felt most powerful. "What did he say?" I pressed, my heart racing. "He denied it, of course," Jason replied. So I pushed further. I asked how he could sit there interviewing me when he destroyed our family for his own selfish desires. Jason's voice was bitter. but there was a sharp sense of triumph too. He was speechless. I left him there, stewing in his guilt. The revelation was staggering. Richard now faced with the consequences of his actions in the most unexpected way. "But why did you go to that interview?" I asked, still trying to wrap my head around the situation. Jason's response was simple yet profound. I needed to see him face to face, to show him that despite everything, he didn't break us. We're still here, and we're fighting back. The aftermath of Jason's encounter with Richard at the job interview sent ripples through our ongoing legal battle. Richard, now aware that his own son stood against him, became increasingly desperate in his defense. Our lawyer, Miss Carter, called us for a strategy meeting. "Richard's lawyers are pushing for a settlement," she informed us as we sat in her office. "But given the evidence and Jason's testimony, I think we can push for more. What do you want to do?" I looked at Jason, seeking his opinion. His jaw was set, his determination clear. "We go all the way," he said firmly. "He needs to be held accountable, not just financially but morally too." Miss Carter nodded, her expression resolute. "Good. Then let's prepare for the next hearing. It's going to be a tough one, but we have the truth on our side." The hearing was indeed challenging. Richard's lawyer tried to paint a picture of a remorseful man who simply made a mistake, but Miss Carter was relentless, presenting evidence of Richard's deceit and his neglect of his family responsibilities. Richard himself took the stand, his demeanor a mix of defiance and feigned contrition. "I regret the pain I caused my family," he said, his voice lacking genuine remorse. "But I believe the settlement offered is fair and just." His words rang hollow, and I felt a surge of anger. How could he stand there playing the victim after all he had done? It was then that Jason spoke up. "Fair and just," he challenged, his voice steady but filled with emotion. "Was it fair to abandon your family, to lie and cheat while we struggled to make ends meet?" The courtroom fell silent, the weight of Jason's words hanging in the air. Richard looked at his son, a flicker of something, guilt, perhaps, crossing his face. But it was too late for regrets. After deliberation, the judge ruled in our favor. The settlement was significantly more than what Richard had offered, a tangible acknowledgement of the harm. As we left the courthouse, a sense of vindication filled me. It wasn't just about the money. It was about justice, about holding Richard accountable for his actions. "We did it, Mom," Jason said, a hint of a smile on his lips. "We finally made him pay." The legal victory over Richard was more than just a win in court. It was a reclaiming of our dignity and a step towards healing. But the story didn't end there. The consequences of Richard's actions started to unravel his life, both professionally and personally. One evening, a few weeks after the trial, I received a call from an old acquaintance who worked at the same pharmaceutical company as Richard. "Anna, have you heard about Richard?" she asked, her voice tinged with a mix of shock and gossip. "No, what happened?" I inquired, a sense of curiosity mixed with apprehension. "He's been demoted," she revealed. "After your lawsuit, the company did their own investigation. Turns out he was using company resources for his personal affairs. They transferred him to a remote factory, practically a career death sentence." I sat in stunned silence. Richard, once the rising star of his company, now faced the repercussions of his actions in the most fitting way. His career, the one thing he had valued over us, was crumbling. Jason listened quietly as I shared the news. "He's getting what he deserves," he said simply, but his eyes reflected a deeper sense of satisfaction. But the retribution didn't stop there. Richard's social circle, once a tight-knit group of colleagues and friends, started to distance themselves. His reputation tarnished by the lawsuit and the company investigation, he became a liability. As I reflected on these developments, I realized that this was not just about revenge. It was about justice, about the universe righting a wrong. Richard, who had once seemed untouchable, was now facing the consequences of his actions. "Do you feel sorry for him?" Jason asked one evening, the discussion more reflective than vengeful. I paused, considering the question. "No," I finally said, but I do feel a sense of closure. It's as if a chapter has finally ended, allowing us to start anew. Yeah, Jason nodded in agreement. It's time to move on, to focus on our lives. The chapter closes with Anna and Jason looking towards the future, the weight of the past slowly lifting from their shoulders. They have faced adversity and emerged stronger, ready to embrace the next chapter of their lives. With the legal battle behind them and Richard facing the consequences of his actions, a new sense of freedom enveloped their lives. It was as if they had been released from a dark cloud that had loomed over them for years. Their small apartment, once a symbol of their struggle, began to feel more like home. They redecorated, making it a reflection of their new beginning. The walls, once bare, were now adorned with artwork and shelves filled with books and memories. Jason, now more relaxed and focused, was excelling in his studies. His previous resolve, born out of anger and a desire for justice, had transformed into a genuine passion for learning. "I'm thinking of applying for a research internship this summer," he told me one evening, his eyes alight with excitement. "That's wonderful, Jason," I said, feeling a surge of pride. "You worked so hard for this." Our conversations had shifted from the past to the future, from what we had endured to what we hoped to achieve. We talked about travel, about the places we wanted to see, and the experiences we wanted to have one day. As we sat sipping coffee in our newly decorated living room, I brought up a topic that had been on my mind. "Jason, have you thought about dating? You know, meeting someone special," I asked. He chuckled a bit, embarrassed. "I've been so focused on school and everything else. But yeah, I think I'm ready to start dating," he said. I smiled, happy to see him considering a normal, happy aspect of life. After everything we had been through, it felt like a victory in itself. As for me, I had grown in my role at the call center, taking on more responsibilities and even mentoring new employees. The job that had once been a necessity had become a source of fulfillment. One evening, as we were having dinner, Jason looked up from his plate and said, "Mom, I've been thinking. We should invite Grandma to come and live with us. She's been alone since Grandpa passed, and I think she'd like it here." The suggestion warmed my heart. "I think that's a great idea, Jason. She's always been there for us. It would be nice to have her close." Our lives had taken a turn towards peace and contentment. With Grandma now living with us, our home felt fuller, brimming with laughter and stories from the past. Her presence brought a sense of completeness, a connection to our roots that we had long missed. One evening, as we sat together, Grandma shared stories of her youth, of the challenges she'd have faced and overcome. "Life is a tapestry of experiences," she said, her eyes reflecting the wisdom of her years. "Some parts are dark and difficult, while others are bright and joyful. But together, they make a beautiful picture." Her words resonated with me. Our journey had been arduous, marked by pain and struggle, but it had also been a journey of growth and resilience. Jason, now more confident and driven, had become an embodiment of that resilience. His academic pursuits were flourishing, and he had even started dating someone he met at university. Seeing him so happy and fulfilled filled me with an indescribable joy. As for me, I had found a sense of purpose beyond the call center. I started volunteering at a local community center, helping other women who have faced similar challenges. Sharing my story and lending a listening ear brought a sense of fulfillment that I had never known before. One night, as Jason and I sat on our balcony looking up at the stars, a sense of calm enveloped us. "Mom, do you ever think about Dad anymore?" he asked, his voice gentle. I paused, considering the question. "Sometimes," I admitted, but not in anger or resentment. "I think about how far we've come since then, how he was a part of our story, but not the defining part." Jason nodded in understanding. "Yeah, I feel the same. He's just a chapter in our past." We sat in silence for a moment, each lost in our thoughts. The journey we had been on was not one we had chosen, but it was one that had shaped us in ways we could never have imagined.